Hello fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 64554637228. And I've noticed a disturbing trend in my life. And that trend is that other people seem to forget a lot, and it tends to cause arguments. And I wish it would stop, but I recognize that that's impossible. What I mean by that is, let's say something that happened with my mom. It was some time ago. I don't know exactly what it was, but alright, my mom made a kitchen cupboard. She had somebody put together a kitchen cupboard. And, we went through a lot to get the cupboard finally done. It was installed, everything was fine. And then one day, my mom suddenly started like muttering to herself under her breath. She started saying like there was a particular fault with the kitchen cupboard, and she kept complaining about the fault, like muttering under her breath. And I didn't really think anything of it the first time, second time, and then I realized the reason why I keep hearing it is because she seems to keep doing it around me, as if I were somehow the person to blame for the way that the cupboard was designed. So I was confused. I was like, what's going on here? And then it just really occurred to me, hey, Mom, I said expressly, I had nothing to do with the design of anything with respect to this cupboard, right? I mean, it sounds like when you're muttering these things that you think that it's somehow my fault. And she stopped. So, yeah, she really thought that I had something to do with the design of the cupboard. And yeah, it's crazy. Now I'll give you another example. I remember, let's say for example, my boss, he gave me a program to write. This happened with two different bosses, actually. One boss, he told me, hey, I have this program that needs getting done. I have somebody else to do it, but do you want to do it or whatever. So anyway, I said, listen, it's going to cost, because I was a consultant, it's going to cost this amount of money, take this amount of time, because I have a rate, so that's how much it's going to cost. When it was done, my boss, I guess something about the way that I did it, there wasn't a fault in the way that I did it, but he probably maybe thought that it was too expensive, that I had charged too much money. But I was charging less money than, or maybe the same amount of money than the other person who said that they were going to do it. I guess something about it, he's like, that's it? That's all that it was, I guess. And he says in a kind of a, grumbling way, well, okay, you just go ahead and do this other stuff. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. Initially, that was done. But I guess he's slightly upset, and he was like, well, go ahead and do the rest of this other work. So now I go ahead and I do the rest of the other work while I'm doing it. And then he comes back at me with, this whole thing, this is way over budget. This is not what we talked about, and blah, 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 blah. To which I had to respond, you're referring to the initial thing? That thing, yeah. That was the price for that thing. You gave me more work, so of course it went over the price that I gave you for the one first thing. So I think that you've forgotten that the price that I gave you was not just for, or it was only for the first job. And it happens with friends, it happens with girls, it happens with family, just over and over and over in my life. There's this thing where people forget, and they'll come back at me with some kind of thing about, or this other time, where my boss said, hey, we have these two programs to write. When can you get these two programs done? So I said, well, I can get this one program done by Wednesday, and I can do the other program by Friday. So my boss is like, well, can you do it faster than that maybe? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think it's going to take that amount of time at least. So time passes. It's time for, I guess, the programs to be done. And my boss is like, you know, you told me that it was going to take X amount of time. I didn't. I told him it was going to take Y amount of time. He wanted it done in X time. So I'm hearing him say this and I have to correct him. I'm like, no, that's the time that you wanted it done. You asked me. I told you it would take Y amount of time. And it wasn't likely to be able to be done in X. Now that it's actually taken Y amount of time, why are you upset with me thinking that it was going to take X amount of time? I have a friend of mine. I finished that thing with my boss. I have a friend of mine who we have discussions from time to time, and we were arguing about the prospects for solar power being useful. Like, would you be able to use it in the winter? And I said, no, it's not likely. There's no reasonable way to go through an entire winter off of the grid just by using solar panels at certain latitudes. So at the equator, probably, because the sun is going to be sufficiently visible, and it's going to be able to supply solar power at the equator almost any time of the year, no problem. But when you get to higher latitudes like the UK or something like that, it's going to be absolutely useless. So for whatever reason, my friend didn't believe me. And, I took a long time and I went and I found this website and I sent it to him and he was like, wow, okay, I did not realize, that is pretty clear. So I thought it was done. I thought we were over. It was finished. So now I'm talking to my friend and I'm like, the issue's resolved. So, it's an established thing. So I'm talking to him and he's like, why are you acting as if it's obvious that in the winter people are going to be not going to be able to live off grid using just a whole bunch of solar panels and batteries? And I'm like, we went over this. What do you mean? He's like, no, as far as I know, it's going to be possible. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. So I go looking for the same article that I'd sent to him. I can't find it. Eventually I have to find a totally different article. I give it to my friend and then he's like, oh, I kind of vaguely remember this. Yeah, right. And I'm like, wow, we discussed this at length. You found, I provided you with the information, and then you just completely and utterly forget everything about it. And, you look at me and you're like, hey, Earthling, that's not such a big deal. People forget. Yeah, except my friend does this over and over. I mean, we have like circular arguments because he'll give me a point, let's say about solar panels, or let's say about whether or not, cell phones can cause cancer or whatever it might be. And I'll say, well, that's not likely because of X, Y, Z. And he'll say, well, okay, but what about, W? And I'm like, no, not W. And then he'll be like, so what about X? I'm like, we already discussed X, and that's why you suggested W, because it wasn't X, it wasn't Y, it wasn't Z. I've asked my friend about it, like, are you sure that you are not perhaps having, maybe early onset Alzheimer's or something? And it is not just because of those two examples that I gave. He's like, he barely remembers university. He just has vague memories of me being helpful to him but no specific memories. And I'm like, really? But it's not just my friend, even my sister, even like relatives. So, my sister lives somewhere else, and I'm here with my mother. So there was a time where I even put it as a reoccurring event that my mom would tell my sister something about something that I did. My sister would call me and say, well, mom said XYZ. Then I would be like, spend an hour on the phone explaining blah 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 blah. And my sister would be like, oh, sorry, I didn't really understand what I get it, I'm sorry, yeah, blah blah blah. But it just kept happening over and over and over, and I'm like, how many times does this have to happen for you to call with a different tone, a non-accusatory tone about something that you heard? Because this has happened so much that I've put it in my calendar, and it's expected that I'm going to have to devote an hour worth of time to explaining the whole intricacies of this particular thing. Well, not even intricacies, because you're not believing me. So yeah, it is it's not something that I can foresee ever stopping, because, and this is with a former friend. I'm kind of glad to say, I'm kind of relieved slightly to say, but of course I'm sad to say, who this is what she would do, which is that she would say something inflammatory, and, well, I don't know that it was inflammatory. Something that I was doing would upset her, and then she'd say, well, I'm upset about it, but let's kill it. And I'm like, this is not my fault. This is not me. This is not something I did. And she'd be like, no, I don't want to talk about it anymore. And after, maybe we might not talk for a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, then she'd call me up and be like, nothing ever happened. And after that, she'd forget completely about the episode. I would go through the mechanics of the episode at some point in the future and explain, listen, that. She wouldn't say anything about it. But the funniest thing is that right now she's like, the last thing that she was saying, because I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. Either we have, for me, what I was telling her is, either we have like a conversation, we don't stop these conversations just abruptly. Either we just have a proper conversation and everybody explains themselves, or we don't have to talk. Because I don't want to be going through these circles where we have a disagreement, usually it's yours, and you never explain, apologize, nothing. But if I do something, it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is what you did, but I kind of forgive you, and let's move on. What? No. So anyway, I think we've agreed not to talk to each other, which is really not like we have agreed, because she's usually not very available. So whenever I guess she is bored or whatever, she will give me a call, and I just kind of take her back, kind of thing, and be like, okay, let's start over until something else. And then, so I don't call her. So I think we've agreed that she's not going to contact me anymore, which is fine, because it's usually a pleasant conversation until it gets unpleasant. And when it gets unpleasant, she does not want to resolve it. So I'm just left with all of these unpleasant things that, anyway, whatever. So anyway, guys, nice talking to y'all. Y'all have a good one. Peace.